Our next speaker is Dr. Andrew Cox from the University of Sheffield, who will talk to us on librarians and data. And he will discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the information profession as we enter deeper into the age of datafication and artificial intelligence. So Dr. Cox is a senior lecturer at the Information School, the University of Sheffield, and much of his research has been around the impact of information profession in such areas as the management of research data, and more recently, their potential roles in AI. In doing so, he has recently published a report for the UK Library Information Association called The Impact of Artificial Intelligence, Machine Learning, Automation and Robotics on the Information Profession. So over to you, Dr. Cox.
Hello, everybody, and I'm very sad not to be there in Stellenbosch with you, not least because it's a cold, grey morning in Sheffield in the United Kingdom. But let me share my slides. Hopefully you should be able to see those now. So I think my talk really complements very well what Isaac's already been saying. I want to look at how librarians have responded to what Sheila Connell calls the decade of data, and how they might respond to the decade of artificial intelligence, which perhaps is coming up. Just to say a bit about us, with the Information School at Sheffield, we're one of the leading information training providers in the UK. So I want to focus on data. Here's Sheila Connell's quote about the data decade. I guess data's always been in information professionals, librarians, perspective in their purview, but we've seen it as at the bottom of the pyramid, requiring more effort and work to kind of turn it into something really valuable like knowledge. When Clive Humby said data is the new oil, I suppose he was saying that that's a very positive thing, but we might, from the perspective of our current challenges around sustainability, be puzzled by that and worried by the thought of extracting anything in the same way as we've exploited oil. So I think there's some ambivalence around this change. There's terms here that Sheila mentions like data valence. It's not all a good thing. And I want to explore the kind of ambivalences around this response to data. It may be a little hard to see this, and I apologize if that's the case, but this is from a McKinsey report from a few years ago, and it showed that you can see in the dark bars of the skills that are growing, technological skills across the board are more and more needed. But interesting, social and emotional skills are seen as growing in value too. But if we zoom in a little bit here, I think it's a bit surprising that the McKinsey study says that quantitative and statistical skills aren't needed more in an age of data. I do think it's a challenge for us as librarians, given the typical backgrounds we have in literacy, I suppose. The advanced literacy in writing is something that for McKinsey seems to be in declining importance. So maybe we are seeing a continuation of that shift away from humanities, qualitative research to quantitative research, data-driven research. But what I want to do in the talk is explore how librarians have responded to this data decade. And in particular, to pick up what Isaac was talking about, is like, what is the impact on our jobs? Are we going to be replaced? Are we going to be dominated in the sense that the AI controls our working lives? Are we going to be divided? Some people benefit a lot and other people are de-skilled. Or is it going to rehumanize our work? What's going to be the impact? We're already busy doing loads of things. It's easy for people like me to come along and say, oh, you all need to learn about artificial intelligence. But oh, you're pretty busy doing your day job. Do we need to learn to write code? Is that implied we did? I'm not so sure. Do we need to become data scientists? I'm going to say no. But I think we're kind of in somewhat agreement, I think, that there's a positive story to say about how libraries already responded to this data decade and how they might get involved in an AI world. So just looking back a little bit, a lot of my work's been about libraries supporting research data management. What have libraries offered in this? So first to say, well, what is data? And when we look at what research data is, it's not just quantitative data, it's qualitative data too. It's not just big data, small data seems to be quite important. And I've seen some interesting reports saying that in the AI world, small data is going to become more important. It's not just print, it's not just digital data, it's print data. So data is a kind of quite complex entity. It's a changing entity that changes through the research process. It's not even necessarily called data, research data. No historian would refer to their sources as data. And ownership is contested between researchers and their passionate creation of data and institutions seeing data as an asset. So data is a rather complex object in research data. I think it's important to remember that, because the word data is quite ambiguous, isn't it? We tend to think of quantitative data, but it isn't necessarily. Again, this slide may be a little bit small to read, but in this, we're just reporting some results from a survey we did that showed the kind of services around research data that librarians were offering. And you can see the top of the tree there is promoting awareness of reusable resources. So it's like, well, we always promote the value of information sources, books, journal articles. Now it's data sources that we might be promoting access to. Second item there, advice on copyright and intellectual property rights. These are things that we've been doing for a long time, but maybe just a little bit translated to a data world. Things at the bottom of the list are much more, advising on data mining or, visualizing and analyzing data. These aren't things that necessarily many libraries would get directly involved in. So I came up with this idea of the data role spectrum, which really said, as regards research data, we tend to do the things in libraries that are near to what we've always done. We translate our skills to support that area. So it's finding access, searching for data rather than searching for publications. It's training people in data literacy as much as information literacy. It's managing a collection of data, just like managing a collection of book materials. So we tend to do the things that are close to what we've always done. We do tend to do the easy things first, I suppose you could say, such as these things. But libraries are pretty enterprising. And I think it's important to also recognise something that Isaac also referred to. It's like, we're not doing the research data support in a vacuum, we're working with others. It's a collaborative enterprise. At the same time, I think it's worth saying that development has been quite slow with multiple models of what maturity and supporting research data management is. So it's quite a complex picture there. So I have done this report recently for CILIP, for the UK Library Association, on the future of libraries and artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is essentially premised on data. So how will librarians contribute to the decade of artificial intelligence? AI, what interests me about AI is not so much that it's a set of technologies, it is a set of functions that we're increasingly familiar with, things like captioning on our Zoom calls, auto-summarization, translation tools. These are all done through artificial intelligence on the basis of the huge amounts of data that people like Google have. All the features of Google that we've encountered in the last few years and Amazon, they're based on AI. AI could also be seen as a set of technologies like natural language processing, speech recognition, so forth. And these are all about computers engaging with more types of data and more unstructured data, more oral data, different types of free text. So data lies behind it. Big data really lies behind lots of artificial intelligence work. And if you haven't got big data, you probably can't do it. AI could also be seen as an industrial complex that supports these big technology companies. It's the power of Facebook and Amazon that relies, as Crawford's recent book shows, on cheap labor, huge amounts of energy, and free data. In other words, our activity data, which has been kind of extracted. So we can see, again, there's this ambivalence about what artificial intelligence is, some kind of very useful, productive ways to make us more productive in our everyday work, but it's also a very powerful industrial complex that's exploiting the world's resources. Again, the ethics of AI, thinking about that, a lot of the ethical issues come down to the data. Biased historical data is going to give you biased outcomes, however good your algorithm is, probably. So how are libraries going to be involved in AI, and what's the history behind this? Again, as I think Isaac said, I think there's quite a long history of us doing stuff around AI type applications. Like there's been a lot of work around text and data mining for a decade, and the digital humanities work, it's all using AI essentially. But I think what we're going to see is, in my report I talk about a range of possible applications. The most important one, probably that I could focus on perhaps, is in knowledge discovery, the new ways of search and collections, that collections themselves become data. That could be our special collections of really valuable materials that we've collected, unique collections. We're going to apply AI techniques to search that. It could be, though, that this is our collections of printed from published material, such as, in most areas, the amount of publications on any topic you can name is so vast that no researcher can read it all. So we need increasingly AI tools to navigate the published literature. So I think our collections will increasingly be seen as data. And that's one role that AI will play in library work. One of the most important ways. But another important way, I think, and we've seen a lot of evidence of this already, is creating libraries supporting communities of data scientists in many different disciplines. Data science is being used in the social sciences, it's being used in digital humanities, it's being used by scientists. Increasingly, institutions are creating communities to support data scientists, regardless of what AI they're using, to help them find data, to choose tools. I'm just creating a community of practice, I suppose, around this new area of research, new methodology, really. And I think libraries could have a really big role in that too. So I think those are two of the main applications of AI that are relevant to librarians. And then the third is a slightly more challenging area, and this is about understanding and managing users. Libraries are rich in data about users. We've got our turnstile and circulation data. we've got very detailed data about how people use digital resources. We also do satisfaction surveys, we field loads of reference inquiries, and we gather qualitative data. We've got a huge amount of data about users. I'm being told that slides are no longer showing. So I better just pause and share. Is that better? Can you see the slides again? I hope you can. I'll just keep talking.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So I hope you didn't miss too much of me whittering. But okay, so I was talking about data, our richness in data about users. And AI may increasingly be used to both exploit that understanding and deepen our understanding. But I think we can learn a lot from the debate about learning analytics. And Jones's recent work on this is really, really powerful in making us worry about the ethical side of this. So in the learning analytics debate, there's a lot of evidence that institutions are using data about students to look at their behavior and try and improve their chances, but maybe without consent, without ethics review. Very few libraries have issued responsible use statements about the use of such data. Often the benefits of using this data in this particular way are unclear. Are they for the institution or for the learner, or are they simply kind of just a punt to see what you can find out? And there's also fears around the impact on privacy, the chilling effect on free speech and expression resulting from monitoring what students do. And I'd also argue that there's a fundamental issue here about the issue of validity, and that is that a lot of the learning data, a lot of the data we collect isn't really about learning. It's about behaviors like going into the library, but it's not about actually learning. It's not the same as learning. We're not measuring learning. So how far can we push this type of data use? And finally, there's quite a lot of evidence that the applications of analysis to library data, often the methodologies used are flawed. So this, I think, prompts a lot of, we should be quite concerned about this idea that data is going to answer all our problems. It's not going to. There's all sorts of issues around how we can use this data. In fact, I think the evidence is information professionals have pushed back pretty strongly against using learning analytics in many respects. But my message is essentially positive about what librarians can bring to data societies, to the data decade, and to the artificial intelligence decade, in terms of skills and knowledge and attitudes, values and a vision. So in terms of skills and knowledge, I think many of the things we already do, just as I talked about in relation to our research data management, many of the things we already do translate to a data world. All we have to do is like think more in data terms. For example, more and more of our collection management skills should be applied to collecting data rather than content, other types of content. We might be involved in helping people to navigate landscapes of searching for data rather than searching for academic papers or blogs or social media data. We might be teaching data and AI literacy as much as information literacy. These do require some changes on our behalf, but they're kind of progressive, they're gradual, evolutionary changes. And I think we have a real strength in this, the richness and abundance of data we have about users' need. We can do more and more work assembling data from a wide range of sources. And that's something I think is really lacking in that many of the AI companies, they're transferring their technologies from other contexts. So they know nothing about library uses, and they're trying to apply it in a library context. It's us that really know about what users need. And in terms of technology knowledge, I think, to echo a little bit of what Isaac said, I think computational sense is the term that Twidell and Nichols came up with, means really just understanding the technology enough to realize what you could do with it. That's what we need to do, not to become data scientists. So in terms of skills and knowledge, we have to update, but we don't have to change radically. And I think also in terms of attitudes and values, we've got a lot to offer. Our kind of focus on service to users, balanced with a sense of institutional agendas, our brilliant collaborative skills and influencing skills. There's a lot of evidence that these are things that are needed in the world of automation. For example, the World Economic Forum's 10 skills to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. You look at them, none of them are technical skills. They're all things like coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, service orientation, and these things I think we can offer. Again, I think in terms of attitudes, our commitment to professional development and learning, that tends to be quite at the top of our kind of list of things that we do, and our professional knowledge sharing, such as in this event itself. These are also real strengths for kind of adapting to a world of AI. In terms of values, I've just reproduced here Silip's ethical statement of values. I'll focus on things like human rights, equality and diversity, and access to knowledge, intellectual freedom. These are really, really relevant in the context of artificial intelligence. I think we do have something quite specific to say in the debate about ethics, the ethics of artificial intelligence. If you look at the IFLA statement on the impact of AI, I think it's talking about things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, that actually don't occur very often in the wider debate about the impact of AI. So I think we have something very specific to say. On the right-hand side of my slide, I think there's some areas where I think we have to think perhaps more deeply, particularly in terms of the relationship between how data can reproduce inequality, data uses can reproduce inequality. That's perhaps something not as a profession we've really looked at. The relevance of sustainability isn't really mentioned, at least in Silip's statement. So I think, and there's certainly perspectives from the global south that are not necessarily embedded in this statement of values. But I think we have, in terms of values, something really useful to say in the AI debate. And finally, I think it's also worth saying that perhaps we should have a vision of what AI and data can offer. In a paper a couple of years ago, we talked about the paradigm of the intelligent library, of moving from helping people to search to find a text to read physically, to interacting with the full text of the library collection. I think that's the move we've ultimately got to make. And I think that could be a real powerful vision of a golden age for libraries and access to knowledge. Another model might be the living systematic review, but I certainly think there's a vision we can offer in an AI world. So that's my presentation. I hope you'll take a chance of reading the report. It's free. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to a discussion.